Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of a build inspired by. You've just caught me relaxing at last episode's build, a lovely cottage in the woods inspired by the one and only Gemini Tay. But in today's episode, I fancy a change of pace. So why don't we look at someone else, the one and only Scott Smajor, or Smajor, or Scott, or dang, that's a long name. Frankly, he's got too many names. So why don't we just head on over to Chromia to try out something a little bit different. Let's go. As you can see, one of the most recognizable aspects of Scott's Chromia color palette is fittingly the use of lots of bright colors. However, he has paired these with other, light but muted colors, such as the spruce and stripped birch. I love this combination, especially when used with a lighter base, combined with a roof that really stands out, such as the subtle gradient used here. Looking a little closer at some of his builds, Scott incorporates a lot of classic building techniques, such as the stone brick base, wood frame extending out from the sides to add depth, and block variation. As such, I want to capture this new take on traditional Minecraft building. As always, it's important to start with a frame, so you know roughly what space your build is going to take up. Templates like this one allow you to visualize what shape your build will eventually have, and how many changes you need to make at an early stage. Taking direct inspiration from Scott, I detailed wood pillars by adding supports to the bases and jutting the top layer out to add some initial depth. I began filling out the skeleton of the build with a layer of stripped oak logs to begin creating that cozy feel, adding in a small archway to frame a spruce door that I set back into the build for extra detail. I finished by adding in the support for the second layer of the build, that we'll come back to later. For the second part of the structure, I wanted to stick to a similar palette, but differentiated the section slightly using stripped jungle logs, which I embedded into the wall to create a subtle arch under the second layer. Speaking of which, I began constructing this using a subtle gradient from stripped birch logs to birch planks. For the upper section of the second structure, I used a random variation of stripped oak logs and planks, a technique frequently employed by Scott. Similarly to the initial wireframe of the base, outlining the roof using only this spruce trim helps to work out any shapes and details before fully committing. For example, I worked out that I wanted the main section of the build to have a steeper roofline to ensure it is eventually the tallest part. I tried to use lots of smooth lines throughout this build to contribute to that cozy cottage feel that I'm aiming for. For the roofline across the top, I tried a technique that I wouldn't normally think of, but Scott has used throughout Chromia, by alternating slabs and full blocks to create a little bit of extra interest. The roof is where I chose to work in the trademark Chromia teal. One of my favourite building techniques is to create roofs that stand out when compared to the rest of the build, and it's difficult to do more than bright blue. I used a subtle, slightly unorthodox, diagonal gradient moving out from the centre of the roof. Scott's colour palette uses a lot of uncommon building blocks, such as warped warts and cyan wool, so it's important to incorporate them in a way that doesn't feel out of place. For the chimney, I used a gradient from darker at the base, as if covered in soot and debris, to lighter andesite at the top, and of course, we needed to finish it off with smoke from a concealed campfire. Now is the time to detail the rest of the build, which of course means windows. For this one, I wanted a slightly larger design to fill out the space, and you know I had to add in a little greenery too. For this next one, I wanted a mangrove cover to add a pop of colour that complements the teal roof, and then a nice hanging basket underneath to complete the look. The surroundings can really make or break a build, so it's important to get the pathway to it right. As you can see, I spent quite a while playing around with the shape to make sure it's just right, before filling it in with stone that becomes more worn towards the edges to help it blend into the surroundings. I thought adding in a wheat field would be another great way to add some life to this build, and make it feel as if this could realistically be someone's home base in their survival world. I then encircled the field with a makeshift stone wall that you might see in the countryside to separate the built up area from the natural terrain, mixing in andesite to add some variation. Finally, I added in some custom cypress trees into a small garden to help frame the build and draw your eyes inwards as you walk up the path. This is a nice simple design that looks well cared for, and hopefully ties the rest of the build together nicely. So first things first, you might have noticed that the clouds have actually changed. I've installed a new mod and I think it makes the terrain look so much nicer. But I would just like to do a nice little tour of the build to wrap up the episode. Coming up this path, you can see all the small details, these little cypress trees that I've added in, I think really frame this build really nicely. And then we've got obviously our wheat field with some farming supplies if you might need it. Heading up here, obviously I might have said before, but building with this blue roof is one of my favourite colour palettes. I think it really complements almost everything nicely, especially this little mangrove accent we've got here. I've used it a few times throughout the build, as you can probably see, but I think it goes really well with the muted sort of brown shades combined with that nice pop of blue as well. As you can see, I've added in a little bit of greenery, just a little bit of decoration on the back. Those small details really do bring the whole build together. And yes, I did build the back of the build, unlike some people I could mention, but let's just not look at the interior. We don't do interiors on this channel. So obviously you might have seen a few of these features before, and that's okay. Reusing features like this can be a good way to easily add interest to build, and you can sort of gather a nice little repertoire of different features. This crooked chimney here really helps bring the whole build together, in my opinion. Again, I am really proud of this one. I think it's quite a unique style to build in. There are less of the fancy gradients that you might see in builds, for example, of BOO. But again, this nice simplified build can look very clean, and it's just quite nice to look at, I think. So yeah, okay, well that is it for today's episode of A Build Inspired By. I want to thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Scott, for building with such a lovely colour palette in Chromia. And until next time, please like the video if you liked the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe check out the finale of Stoplight SMP, my Life Series fan series. It'll be linked in the description and the little iCard in the corner, and I would really appreciate it. But I will see you in the next one. But until then, that's all, folks.